Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast this week is Nigel Adderley. Nigel is a name very well known in media and sports broadcasting. He's had a distinguished career working for BBC, Talk Radio, Talk Sport, I should say, and has covered some of the biggest events in the sporting diaries. Nigel, it's great to get you on. How are you doing?
I'm fine, Alex. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great. It's really great. I love chatting to broadcasters. I'm a big fan of radio as a platform, and I remember you from those early days at Radio Lancashire. Now,
Way back.
do you have fond memories of Radio Lancashire? Just tell us a bit about
I do. That was where I really sort of cut my teeth as a sports reporter because I was very young. I went to university in York and I started at BBC Radio York after doing my degree, which was in politics, nothing to do with sports journalism or the sort of degrees that people do now. And then in 1994, at the age of 22, I went to Radio Lancashire, got a job there as a sports reporter. I replaced a guy called Simon Hill, who's now very well known in Australia. He's sort of the voice of football in Australia. He moved on. I came in, and Guy Havord was the sports editor. Gary Hickson, who's only recently left the station, was the main presenter. And when I joined, we were the sports team, and it was a really good patch. I think people outside of Lancashire sort of maybe looked down on the area because you had Liverpool and Manchester very near. But at the time, we had Blackburn on the rise with the money from Jack Walker and Dalglish. I joined in the April, and within a month, Burnley had been promoted in the playoffs to the old second division. That memorable night when they won at Plymouth, and then they beat Stockport against the 9 men at Wembley. You had Preston there with John Beck as the manager on the plastic pitch. You had Sam Allardyce coming in to manage Blackpool. So there were some massive personalities. I was there 4 years, learned an incredible amount. I remember things that I still talk about now with former colleagues, and yeah, it was a great grounding and a great patch to work on. Not forgetting the cricket as well, of course, which was absolutely huge.
that. I suppose back in those days, Nigel, if you wanted to speak to somebody, a manager Allardyce or whatever, there was a call into the secretary, was it? It seems as though all that's a bit more protected now. You can't have those kind of same relationships.
No, that's very right. That's right, Alex. Now it is quite sanitized. You have to go through press officers. You have to go through various levels of club apparatchiks. You have a press conference at an appointed time, and then you turn up and you get what you're given. And often you'll find out that the club have interviewed the player you really wanted to talk to, but they'll put that on their website, and you often talk to someone else. Back in the day, when Gary Peters became the Preston manager, I would just ring him on a Thursday and say, "What time do you want me there?" And he would say, "I'll come down and have a cup of tea at 8:30. We'll have a chat and we'll do the interview." And I used to do that, and that was a way of building contacts. And Gary Hickson used to do the same with Sam Allardyce. Jimmy Mullen was the Burnley manager. We'd just ring him up and say, "When do you want us down there?" It was slightly different at Blackburn. Blackburn, even then, we're becoming a big club in terms of, or certainly a big noise, if not necessarily a big club in the Premier League. And you had to deal with Kenny Dalglish. And on the occasions I had to go down there as a very young journalist, as I said, 22, 23 years of age, the Thursday night before going down to Brockhall, the training ground, on the Friday morning, I wouldn't sleep because interviewing Dalglish was an incredibly intimidating thing. You only give him three questions to Dalglish, and if he didn't like you that particular day or didn't like the line of questioning, you got nothing. And you would then go back into the office and you would have nothing on your reel of tape. And you'd have to try and grab a player in the car park. And a lot of the players weren't keen to talk, particularly when they were in title races. And it was really hard work. And often, I've always thought that the supporters of Preston, Blackpool, and Burnley were better served than maybe the fans of Blackburn, as far as Radio Lancashire and the media were concerned, simply because we got more access, people were happy to talk to you, and as a result, we had better relations.
Things have changed. Just on the East Lancashire clubs, Nigel, generally it's been a real kind of 10, 15 years of general success. I mean, I never thought I'd see Burnley in the Premier League. I never thought I'd see Blackburn win the Premier League. I never thought I'd see Accrington Stanley make the Football League. And then in there you've got Blackpool who made it to the hierarchy of football, and a few clubs like Preston and Bolton Wanderers maybe stagnated a little bit, but it's been a good time for football in Lancashire, hasn't it?
It has. But when I was there, we had 4 Football League clubs. In the first season I worked there properly, 94, 95, we had a team in each division. Blackburn won the league that year. Burnley were in the second division, Blackpool the third, and Preston the fourth. Now, Radio Lancashire have got 7 Football League clubs. You've got Morecambe, you've got Accrington, as you
Yeah.
say, you've got Fleetwood
Yeah.
up in the north, and I don't know how they do it with the resources that they have. I mean, we used to cover the odd Morecambe game when they were in the conference, as it was then, and we'd go to the old Christie Park before they moved into the new stadium. And it's an incredibly busy patch now. Of course, the cricket always takes up a large chunk of the broadcasting during the summer as well. So I think Lancashire football, it's always evolving now, because at that time we thought Blackburn would be in the Premier League forever and they would be challenging forever. They fell away fairly quickly. I remember going to Warsaw to cover a Champions League game after the title success. Ray Harford was then the manager. Dalglish had moved upstairs, and they lost 1-0. Terrible game in Warsaw. I did the commentary with Paul Mariner, and Harford made this memorable comment. Yeah, it seems the Champions League's become a real distraction for us. I mean, could you imagine anyone saying that now? But I think, you've had Blackburn having their time in the Premier League, almost going down again into the third tier this season. Burnley seeming to shuttle between the top 2 divisions. Blackpool challenging. It's ever changing these days, and the personalities are ever changing. I think when I was there was maybe a less of a sense of flux, so it's possibly easier to cover. And it was easier to cover because, as you said at the top of the podcast, the access was better then.
Just a word on Burnley, Nigel, because I think in many ways, having the joy of last year in the Championship and then getting promoted, this year for Burnley fans and for me has been pretty torrid. I've not enjoyed the football experience one bit, but one thing that the Premier League does give clubs is an ability to be transformational, doesn't it? Because you will know Jamie Hoyland, I'm sure, who
Yes.
came, and he talked about the Gawthorpe days of old, where it was a bit of a mud hut and the pitches were pretty grim. One thing the Premier League does give you is that ability to transform what you've got, and think about Blackpool did similar, didn't they?
Yeah, and of course it didn't end well for Blackpool because of the antics of the Oyston family at the time. I used to go to Gawthorpe on the occasions when I would cover Burnley, and often Jamie was the only player who would talk to you at times, particularly under the season with Chris Waddle and Glenn Roeder, where things went fairly sour, and Jamie was on the outside, seemingly out of favour, and then ended up coming back into the team along with Andy Cook and helping to keep them up in the end. It can be transformational. I have to be brutally honest and say I've been to Burnley a lot over the years. I only ever used to go to Turf Moor. I never really used to go into Burnley for a night out or even a cup of tea. It was just because I lived in Blackburn, then I moved out to Preston because as a young person, Preston was probably a better place to live as it was a university town at the time. But you can see the effect. I know people in Burnley that having that football club doing well does transform the club, not just the Royal Dyche across the road. In a town that size, to have a Premier League club competing for as many years as they did, it does give the club a real sense of purpose, along with Jimmy Anderson, of course, being a record breaker for the England team, another great ambassador for the town as well, because we are talking about small towns. I mean, Burnley are a small town. Blackburn's a small town, but they're both punched above their weight in the Premier League. And I have to say, I haven't been to Burnley's training ground since the days of Gawthorpe, but I would imagine, as you say, it was basically a hut and a few pitches, and there were a few ducks in the stream next door to the pitches, which often used to flood when you used to get plenty of rain, which, of course, in that part of the world you did. So Yeah, it is a very different club now. I mean, Turf Moor is an incredibly different stadium to the one that I used to go and watch when I was a fan, go to watch Tranmere there in the 1980s, standing on the away part of the long side. I
Mm,
mean, it's a great stadium now.
mm,
It's perfect for a club the size of Burnley. You
yeah,
still got the Bob Lord and the cricket field, but what they've done to that club is amazing.
yeah. And talking to Premier League, Nigel, you move on from Radio Lancashire. Just tell our listeners and viewers how that comes about. I do sometimes wonder how you go from being a provincial commentator, broadcaster, to kind of stepping up. What was the story for you?
Well, I think there are possibly two types of people in local radio. There are the people who want to stay in their patch because maybe they support a team or they've got family ties to the area or they just enjoy the job. Or there are maybe people who want to move on. And I was very young when I was at Radio Lancashire. I left when I was 26, and I probably always viewed it as a stepping stone. I had to learn, and I spent 4 years there learning, but I was always keen to try and get down to London. I had no family ties to Lancashire. My mum and dad lived in Chester. I was a Tranmere fan, which was very handy living in Lancashire. I could go to many more games than I do now. Friday nights at Prenton Park. I used to leave Radio Lancashire at 6 o'clock and be outside Prenton Park by 7. I couldn't do it now with the traffic in that part of the world. But I was keen to go down to London, had various attempts, and in the end, I got a 6-month attachment, a sort of secondment to go and work in the sports room in London. Did okay, got extended, eventually got made staff, and that's where I was. Not necessarily doing what I wanted to do. In those days, you tended to find that people would sort of be in local radio, then almost disappear. And that's what I did because you join as a producer and you are behind the scenes. You are producing the sports bulletins. You are helping to produce Sport on 5 as it was with Ian Payne back in the late 1980s. But gradually, you try and remain hungry. I kept my hand in by doing games for Radio Lancashire when they were playing in the south, when Blackburn and Preston in particular were playing, say, Queen's Park Rangers or Crystal Palace or Watford. I would help Gary out and do those games on a Saturday afternoon. And you try and make progress. And eventually, I became a sports news correspondent, which was a great job covering FIFA and UEFA at a time when there was lots of politics, real politics going on at the top of football. That also gave me the opportunity to do more football commentary, which I did, and I ended up being part of the football team, which is always seen as the dream job at Five Live. Basically, all you did was commentate on football, and it was great.
Is it different working for the BBC than working for somebody like talkSPORT? And if so, what is it? Is it there subtle differences or?
Well, the main difference is I'm freelance now. I was on a staff contract then at the BBC, and I got made redundant after the Olympics in 2012. A lot of the sport was moving up to Salford, where they are now, of course. So it was a good time to leave in many ways, but I became freelance. But when you're working in the commercial world, I mean, the clear differences is you're having to plug betting websites and everything else in car dealerships and whatever's paying for it. And you have to reconcile yourself to that very early on, that the reason you're doing that commentary is because the advertising reads that you're doing during the game are paying for you to be there. So you basically have to do that. And there are different, there is a BBC way of doing things, and there is a commercial radio or a talk sport way of doing things. I think increasingly talk sport and Five Live have become a lot closer than they were in the way they do things, and certainly the audiences have narrowed. It used to be that Five Live had a massive lead over talkSPORT due to various rights being won by talkSPORT, Premier League, and now they're the exclusive holders of the EFL. The audience figures have grown for talkSPORT, and they've got smaller for Five Live. But I think with Five Live, there was always someone there you could speak to. There was always someone there who was possibly a bit of a spare part. It's a bit slimmer down in commercial radio, and probably that's a good way to go. You have to be a bit more, show a bit more initiative, and that's what you have to learn very quickly.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the quality of sports broadcasting in the country's is exceptional. I mean, I really do. I mean, I'm not very loyal radio. You know, I will flick between Five Live and talkSPORT, but the quality and the content really is excellent, isn't it?
Yes, and I think there are some excellent presenters at the heart of that. I mean, Adrian Durham on talkSPORT and Mark Chapman on Five Live are the best at what they do. And you think there are very few people who have done that job. I mean, going back on Five Live, you can probably go back to John Inverdale,
Mm.
Ian Payne,
Mm.
Mark Pugach. Mark Chapman is a fitting successor to those, and Adrian Durham really has been the only sort of Saturday afternoon presenter on talkSPORT. He does his job brilliantly. I know them both. I know Adrian better now because I work on talkSPORT, but they're both top performers. And I think that there is despite the shrinking resources for the BBC, I think they use their resources well. They have to be a bit smarter. They've still got excellent commentators and broadcasters like John Murray, Ian Dennis, Alistair Bruce Ball. That they're terrific. And on talkSPORT, Jim Proudfoot, Ian Danter, Joe Shannon, all very good commentators as well. So I think that there is a real spread of talent across the board, and it's good. You want competition, and you want people to basically, well, from our point of view, you want to be in jobs, but at the same time you want to have a range of voices and a range of styles, because from a listener's point of view, I think people like the light and shade. And John Murray is a very different commentator to, say, Jonathan Pearce,
Mm.
but that's the strength of both of them.
Yeah. If anybody's enjoying this podcast, which I hope you are, Ian Danter has been a guest on here. That you'll find that on the link, and also Peter Smith from Sky Sports News has been on as well. So, yeah, if you're enjoying this chat, do check that out. Peter, I want to, sorry, Nigel, I want to ask you about what you enjoy the most in your commentary. You've been blessed. You've commentated in some of the biggest tournaments, some of the biggest games. Um, and where I'm going with this is that just recently I've been re-exploring non-league football. I've been going down to places like Colne and Padiham to watch Northwest Counties, and I've really loved it. I used to be a ref, and that was where I cut my teeth officiating. But you as well as doing those big games, Nigel, you will also do games down lower down the league. I'm just wondering if you, like me, enjoy those experiences as much as the joys of the Premier League.
Yeah, I've got to be honest. I mean, look, it's commentary is the best job in the world, but it is a job. If I'm covering the Premier League, I don't support a Premier League club. I have no skin in the game from that point of view, and maybe that's a good thing, because I'm not, biased in any way towards any club. And I support Tranmere; they play in League Two, and obviously I see lower league football. I live in Chesham, in Buckinghamshire. I go and watch Chesham United,
Hmm.
my local non-league team. They've just got promoted into the National League South this season, so. It is a very different experience, but I love going to Chesham, where I can, pay 10 quid, 12 quid, go and buy a pint, stand on the terrace, have a chat with a few mates, watch the game. Alex Horn from Taskmaster is a big Chesham United fan, and he's Taskmaster now sponsor the shirts, which is a brilliant marketing gimmick, because people all around the world have now bought Cheshire United shirts who are fans of Taskmaster. So things have changed slightly there, but the team's got more successful for a start, and they've got promoted. I love going to non-league football.
Yeah.
I took my son to watch Hanwell Town against Chesham earlier in the season. Hanwell Town, which is on the outskirts of London, they bought a decommissioned London bus, and they've turned it into a cafe. So you go into the bus where you would buy your ticket, you get your cup of tea and your pie, and you go on the top deck, and you've got like a fantastic panoramic view of the football ground. And I love things like that.
Yeah.
And watching lower league football is good, because I think you feel you make more of a difference. If you are one of 5,000, 6,000 people who go to a game, that ticket and that shirt you bought, and the merchandise you may have bought for your kids, that's going to have a bigger role than, say, a Premier League supporter who's one of 50,000 at a game. That's not to say that their support is any less useful, or any less relevant. But I think you can make a case to say that if you support a big Premier League club, you probably are. You're not as valued as much because A, there are more of you, and B, there are other revenue streams. If you are Cheshire United, you live off what you make through the gate.
Yeah.
To a lesser extent, Tranmere as well. But if you're Manchester United or Liverpool or Manchester City, you're making money, hundreds of millions of pounds, 7 days a week. You could probably hold your games in an empty stadium. Really, the fans there now could almost be considered window dressing.
Yeah.
I think it's maybe different at Burnley because there are still generations of Burnley fans who experienced the lower divisions, experienced the hard times. But I think it's becoming a more and more there's a bigger disparity now between the experience of watching a Premier League game and say watching a game in League Two or non-league.
Yeah, I worry about the Premier League. I don't know if it's because I'm getting older, but I'm seem to be getting less interested in it because I went to the last game of the season at Turf Moor. We played Notts Forest, and 23,000 fans, except for the vicar, were singing songs how corrupt the Premier League was. It was a cacophony, a mass gathering of people singing the same song with the same feeling, and I wonder what your assessment is, Nigel, of the Premier League. Now we've got we've got all sorts of conundrums in the Premier League, haven't we? We've got Man City facing charges. We've had points deductions for Forest and Everton. We've got VAR, which just seems to just get more controversial as the weeks go by, when it was meant to reduce those issues. We've got Nottingham Forest employing ex-referees. I was a ref for many years, Nigel, and I used to just like the rule of football where it used to say, in the opinion of the referee. It seems to be anything but now.
Yeah, I mean VAR is an issue. I mean personally, I think the problem is not with the system; it is with the people who are using it. That they make mistakes, and as you say, it used to be the opinion of the referee, and now it's still the opinion of the referee in some cases, even though they've got the technology, and that's going to be a problem. It was never going to be the panacea that maybe some people thought it was going to be. I think, decisions have been overturned. There maybe been more right decisions, but there's been a lot of wrong decisions as well. And there may be some Burnley fans who are quite grateful that they're dropping down into the Championship again next season, and they won't have to worry about VAR. And when you see games in the Championship, you see refereeing mistakes, honest mistakes, but people just get on with it because they have to. You don't overanalyze it. You just get on with it. And people may go on social media and pick out clips and say, Leeds fans are very good at this, of course, saying, oh, look at this, look at what happened to Bamford here. But it happens, and people do make mistakes. It's a fast-moving game. It's getting quicker. You've got one referee with his two assistants, and they can't see everything on the pitch because that is simply impossible. But I don't envy the Premier League in trying to rein in people's spending, because we've now got the legal action involving Manchester City, where they are challenging the rules, basically, which say that clubs have to have these sustainability and profitability. But if they don't, clubs could go to the wall. The Premier League are thinking, look, a team can come up from the Championship, spend £500 million, go down and go out of business. We've seen it happen abroad. We've seen it happen in other European leagues. Teams have a great spell and then they very, very quickly disappear. Even local to you, remember Colne Dynamos?
I do.
They got to Wembley. They were bankrolled, non-league clubs. You see plenty of non-league clubs have lots of money thrown at them. They don't necessarily get to where they want to be, and then they disappear. And they have Phoenix clubs. And so I think the Premier League are trying to avoid that, but you are always going to get clubs who are going to get as close as they can. We had the playoff final a few years ago. I commentated on it at Wembley, 2019, Villa against Derby. And it was fairly clear that whoever lost that game was going to have huge financial issues. Villa got promoted, and as a result of that, they got the Premier League money, and they could offset those problems. Derby stayed in the Championship, and as a result of that, they almost disappeared. And, you've got that brinkmanship now, and it's in the Championship. Certain teams will spend. The good thing about Burnley was they didn't overspend this year. I know they spent some money. People have talked about £100 million, but they'll have some money in the kitty to come down, and they'll have also got the compensation for company, and they're trying to run themselves as a business. And if you have no rules, you are relying on clubs running themselves as responsible businesses, and it is impossible in a club of 20 to have everybody working like that. You will always have someone trying to emulate Manchester City, and it's impossible. They've got a nation state behind them. You just got to basically say, look, we can't compete with them. So the Premier League are trying to make it as much of a level playing field. That's why we've got these rules. But now, of course, people say they're anti-competitive. So where do you draw the line?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? But I'm really looking forward to next season in the Championship because I know it's going to be competitive. I know I don't have to look at the screen and wait for 2 or 3 minutes for a decision. And I know the Burnley fans will stick around as well. Season tickets have been excellent for next season, so it's not all doom and gloom. What about the international scene, Nigel? I'm one of these that thinks that the England team is the right team, but with the wrong manager. I can't help thinking. Somebody might message me in a few weeks and say, you got it wrong. But I just can't see us winning the Championship under his stewardship. What do you think?
Well, I'm a big fan of Gareth Southgate. I should put my cards on the table because I was covering England for talkSPORT when he got the job, and I spent a lot of time talking to him both on the mic and off the mic, and I think he's a tremendous person, not just for the football coaching, but also for his sense of public duty and the way he talks about various issues. He is not an automaton giving a press conference. He gives a press conference like a human being, and sometimes he shows his own fallibilities, maybe, but I think he always tries to do the right thing. And when he took the England job, it was a mess. Sam Allardyce had been sacked after the pint of wine, and he basically got the team to stumble through a World Cup qualification. And I remember asking him, I think they beat Slovenia 1-0 to qualify for the World Cup. Paper aeroplanes were coming down. The Wembley was far from full. And I said to him, people are bored. What are you going to do? And he said, people are bored. And that's something I've got to change. And that's not just from me. The people have got to reconnect with the players. This team has got to reconnect with the public. And that's what he did. Rather than the players being in their ivory towers, he got the players to go out and talk, tell people your stories, maybe talk about your vulnerabilities, get people to understand what makes you tick. And they went to the World Cup in Russia. They weren't a great team. They were a set-piece team. I think 3/4 of their goals came from set pieces. But they got to the semi-final. They massively overachieved. The players got more confidence. They've improved. I mean, you compare the squad he took to Russia with the squad he's got now, there is no comparison. And really, they should be in the mix. Now, is it that he's not the right manager, or does that shirt still weigh very heavy on some players' shoulders? It could be a bit of both. You look at his decision-making in key games, maybe the final against Italy in the last Euros, maybe the quarter-final against France. But you look at that game, or both games, if penalties had been scored, the story could have been very different. It's very fine margins, and he's found himself on the wrong end of those fine margins. So it's very difficult for him to try and win tournaments, as we know. I mean, Italy won the Euros, didn't qualify for the World Cup. Can you imagine the amount of criticism, the disaster scope we would have had if England had failed to qualify for the World Cup? Do you remember the last time it didn't happen? When Graham Taylor and the Turnips in 1994. So I think he was the right man for the job at the time. I think he's done a brilliant job. I think he'll move on whatever happens. Where he goes next, I don't know. I've always thought he is an international manager or maybe a technical director. I don't think he's suited to the rhythm of day-to-day management. I think, if he's not going to Manchester United because Ten Hag's staying, apparently. That's a terrible job to take, particularly if you've been an international manager for 8 years. But I think, would England be where they are now if it wasn't for Gareth Southgate? And I think the answer is no. But he's judged on winning tournaments now, and it's a very harsh landscape.
Yeah. Well, my critique of him is not about his personality or his. I'm just not sure he gets the best out of people. But that's football, isn't it? It's about opinions, isn't it? Who do you think are going to be the stars of the Euros? When I've been blessed to watch Premier League footy this year. I've seen the likes of.
You weren't blessed too much at Turf Moor.
Well, no, but I was about to say, cheers, Nigel. Thanks for that. I was going to say, whilst Burnley weren't the best, I have been blessed to see some incredible footballers, and I feel Phil Foden for me is an extraordinary footballer. He seems to glide. I've never had the joy of seeing Bellingham play, but but Foden seems to be in that category. He just seems to kind of almost like skate around the pitch. He's a fantastic footballer, and I'd love to think he'd be the star of the Euros. Do you think he could be?
He could be. I think Bellingham could be, certainly. I mean, I remember commentating on him when he was a 16-year-old at Birmingham.
Mm.
And we'd heard this talk about this kid at Birmingham that was going to go into the first team. You think, well, he's 15, 16 years of age. But you saw him play, and he was an absolute physical monster then. And as you say, he glided. And in a poor Birmingham team in the Championship, which, as fans will know, is a hard school, he was dominating games. And you thought, blimey, if he gets the right sort of advice, he's going to go right to the very top. And he's got a great family behind him. He got the right sort of advice. He went to Dortmund, which was a good environment for him. Now he's made the move, and now he is at the top of the world, pretty much, winning the Champions League at the age of 21. And providing he stays fit, he could go down as one of the greatest ever. To do that, he'll have to win the World Cup, of course. So we'll see what happens. But England have got so much talent, but the question is getting them into the team. And I agree with you about Southgate. I think at times he is quite a conservative manager with a small c. He's often thinking about clean sheets rather than scoring 6 goals at the other end. Now, defensively, I think England are quite weak. He doesn't have a recognised left back that's fit going into the tournament. And he always said when he got the job, he would never take injured players. Now he is. He's taken Luke Shaw on the hope that he'll be fit later on in the group stage. And that never works. England teams have been littered with players who've not been fit in previous tournaments. And it never works. So I think England's best form of defence would be attack. And they've got so many attacking players, but they could be picked off. So it's a really tricky balancing act. I mean, they've got so much attacking talent, Foden, Bellingham. You think, but where do you play them? Where do you bring in Saka? Kane's obviously going to play because he's the captain. So it was almost a similar problem that Sven-Göran Eriksson had 20 years ago. I remember being in Portugal when I was at the BBC covering the Euros there. And England had, Gerrard, Scholes and Lampard. How do you get them into the midfield? So they end up playing Scholes wide, and he gets annoyed, and he basically retires. And that was a terrible thing for him, because Paul Scholes would always be an asset to any team. So it's about getting the right sort of balance. And he's made some bold decisions in leaving out people like Grealish and Maddison, who've not been playing well and don't really justify their place in the squad. And it's tricky. And Serbia's a tough first game for England. I've got to say, I'm Welsh, so I don't really have a massive amount of love for England. I mean, I like Southgate, and I like some of the players, having spoken to them. But I'm in no way will I be cheering England on, because that's not what Welsh people do. But I'd like to see Southgate do well, which is a bit of a dichotomy. But Serbia's a tough first game. They've got some decent players as well, and players are in form. So if they win that, they'll get some momentum. If they don't, then of course the snipers will be out straight away. Yeah.
I can almost see myself coming out with the touche moment of saying, if it's been bad watching Burnley, it can't be half as bad as been watching Wales.
No, that's very true. That's very true. But I mean, and Burnley have had a couple of Welsh internationals as well
Oh
to
yeah.
who've been part of that. But no, Wales are on a downward spiral, and having backed Gareth Southgate, I'm not necessarily sure that Rob Page is certainly the manager to take them to the next World Cup. But we'll have to wait and see. They gave him a massive contract after they qualified for the previous one, which was undoubtedly his triumph. And now they've got some big decisions to make, either on the field or off the field.
Yeah, you just got me thinking there about Welsh Burnley links because Leighton James worked for Radio Lancashire. Were you there at that time, or was that?
Yeah, worked with Leighton. It was very sad
Yeah,
to hear about his death a couple
yeah,
of months ago now, wasn't it? I rang him only a few weeks before he died. I hadn't spoken to him for a long time, but I was trying to get hold of him because some of us surprised Gary Hickson on his final program at Radio Lancashire. Myself, Dave Farrer, Simon Hill, Guy Havord, we all basically came on the air, and Gary wasn't expecting it. And we're trying to get hold of Leighton because um, you're old enough to remember the Leighton James Football Hour on Radio Lancashire, 7 o'clock on a Friday night, and a time before social media. That was appointment to listen. The managers listened, the players listened, and he was great. And of course, he's a Burnley legend. I think it probably was always a regret of his that he never got to manage Burnley, but he obviously went to Morecambe and didn't quite work out there. Maybe that was an opportunity to possibly get Morecambe close to the Football League, and then he could have possibly moved on to Burnley, which would have been a natural progression for him. But no, I mean, I remember him as a player more with Swansea rather than Burnley. And obviously, he went back to Burnley, and I always remember 1987 because Burnley and Tranmere were scrapping to stay in the league, the first season of automatic relegation. And I remember Leighton saying he played, 700 games to play the most important game of his life, that game against Orient. So it was Leighton was a legend. I mean, he was a force of nature off the field, certainly as a broadcaster. But no, I mean, I'm sure the Burnley fans know their football, and I'm sure he was given the right sort of tribute because he was an all-time great.
he definitely was, and I knew him a little bit. My first ever game I refereed was a Sunday League match where who's turning out for the Sunday League guys, none other than Leighton James, and he gave me a torrid time. But he used to frequent Burnley Cricket Club, and where we had our meetings, so I got to know him a little bit. And he was a complete gentleman and a real encourager as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, when people say he's a football man, but Leighton really was. He lived the game. I mean, he was obviously part of that great Burnley team with
Mm,
all the young players that came through, like Casper and Dobson,
mm,
before my time, really, in the early 70s. And he had a great career. He played for some big clubs, and he made an impact wherever he went, and then he went home in many ways to go and play for Swansea, and got them promoted into the old First Division under John Toshack, gave them their first golden era, really. And then he goes back to Burnley, and he was almost playing as a centre half in the end, or a sweeper, but trying to get some of the young players through towards the end of the 80s. So, no, I mean, Leighton was a great guy to work with. Among many, we used to work with Richard Dinnis, the old Blackburn manager at Radio Lancashire as well. He was a broadcaster for a long time. Paul Mariner
mm.
was somebody I worked very closely with, became a very close friend. Tragically, we lost him a few years ago as well. So, there were some brilliant names to work with.
Well, Nigel, I could talk to you all afternoon about football. It's my other hobby other than doing a bit of God here and there. What's your summer looking like? Have you got a busy summer ahead, or are you kind of chilling, or how's it look?
No, I'm busy, which is great. As a freelancer, you're always looking to be busy, but I'm commentating on a few games for talkSPORT on the Euros. I've got Italy against Albania coming up on Saturday, the first weekend of the tournament, and then a bit of a holiday with the family, and then I'm going to the Olympics. talkSPORT have secured rights to cover the Olympics this year for the first time, and I'll be doing the athletics in the stadium, Stade de France. So looking forward to that. Having to do my research for that at the moment as well. And then we get back and the football season's already started. I think the EFL season begins the last weekend of the Olympics. So we'll be straight into that again, hopefully.
Fabulous. Well, thanks for coming on, Nigel. I really appreciate it. I hope people have enjoyed listening to this. If they have, there's all sorts of sporting figures on there. Loads of footballers. Nigel mentioned Cone Dynamos. Derek Scott, who actually played for Cone Dynamos, is on there, so do check that out. But Nigel, thanks again, and thanks for coming on the Godcast. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.